In today's video, we are going to see the game between Alireza Firouzja and world's #1 tournament leader Magnus Carlsen. It's round 9 of Norway Chess. And whenever these two guys are playing against each other, we get to see some very interesting chess between these two giants. Firouzja is playing with the white pieces, and let's see what is going to happen. It's a classical game, of course. If the game ends in a draw, there is an Armageddon, which makes it very interesting for the scoring point system. Anyway, we are first going to see the classical game as Firouzja opens here with the move 1e4. Magnus goes for a very solid line with e5. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian opening, d3, knight f6. And still, Firouzja is a super ambitious player and goes for one of the sharpest setups available for white with the move bishop g5. He is pinning the knight on f6. White will have to move the bishop again after h6. As black is attacking it, bishop goes to h4, d6 played. And now white played the move c3, a6, knight bd2, bishop a7. All pretty standard way of playing. There are so many different move orders available for both sides, but still this should not have come as a surprise to both of them. Magnus has some experience with this opening from the black side as well. White castled, black played queen e7, solid move, just moving the queen away. And after the move b4, white is grabbing space on the queen side. Magnus's idea is to play the move bishop e6, so trying to exchange this very good bishop on c4. White is of course not able to ignore the exchange, but can in the meantime try to grab more space on the queen side. Castling king side, and here interesting moment, as in some earlier games played by Magnus, including in last year's event in Norway Chess. Here Gukesh play the move rook e1, and after bishop takes, knight takes c4. I mean, there are ideas for black also to get out of the pin with queen e6, or play even more ambitiously with a move like b5, which was the game's continuation. In any case, this is something Firouzja had studied before this game, and rather than playing rook e1, he played here the move rook b1. But also after this move, bishop takes c4 played, knight takes c4. And well, black really wants to get out of that pin. That's a very annoying pin, and there are usually two ways of doing so. You can always consider a move like g5, but whenever you go g5, knight takes g5 is a possibility, sacrificing the knight with tremendous pressure against that knight on f6. So Magnus, with the idea of taking on c4, he decides to move the queen away from that pin. Queen is rock solid on e6, and there are even ideas sometimes to take on e4, so that if you do take back with the pawn on e4, there is queen takes c4. So that is the idea of Magnus. He wants to play solid chess against one of the most aggressive players in the world. Very sensible approach, of course. Bishop takes f6 was played because now the pin has been removed. The bishop on h4 is not doing too much, so white decides to take on f6. Queen takes back, b5, that's the idea of rook b1, to attack the knight. Pawn takes, rook takes b5, attacking the pawn on b7. And of course, if you would ever play something like b6, then that bishop on a7 will be out of play. So that is not attractive, and instead of playing that pawn move, Magnus improves the knight by going back to d8. He defends the pawn, and after the move d4, white is advancing in the center. Black played the move c6, attacking the rook. The rook goes back to b1. Pawn takes d4, c takes d4, knight e6, so that the knight attacks the pawn on d4. If you take on d6, it's knight takes d4, and well, a lot of pawns are going to be swapped. Even if you lose the pawn on b7, very likely at some point that the pawn on a4 is also quite vulnerable. So I don't think white can play for anything here. Instead, Firouzja played knight b6, attacking the rook, also threatening a knight fork on d7, winning the exchange. So bishop takes, rook a7 played, defending the pawn. And well, black is, as I said already, rock solid with ideas even to double on the a file and remove that pawn from a4. White goes for d5, attacking the knight, pawn takes, queen takes, creating new weaknesses on b7 and d6, but pawn on a4 can be taken as well. Queen takes b7, knight to d4, knight takes d4, queen takes rook takes d4, so you keep everything defended. And well, we have a major piece endgame, but what to do with that weak pawn? It's well defended, and in the meantime, black is going to attack the pawn on e4 with the rooks. White can, of course, defend it here with rook e3, but then the queen comes to g6, so for the third time, a piece is attacking the pawn, rook f e1, and black played the move d5, breaking free here. If you take it, well, you can easily take on e3 with the rook. Cannot take back with the rook because of back ranked mate. And if you take with the pawn, it's rook d2, threatening checkmate. You can defend it here by moving the pawn to d6. So the queen defends the pawn on g2. But after taking, well, it's going to be a draw. It's just very, very equal. But if someone is better, it is black. In any case, Firouzja played differently. Instead of capturing the pawn, he went for e5. Queen goes to e6. White goes h3. Rook c4 played. So ready to advance the pawn to d4. Maybe play rook c5 at some point, trying to win the pawn on e5. Rook d3. Attacking the pawn on d5. But after black's move, rook e4, everything is going to be swapped. Like you're attacking the rook on e1, you're interfering on the e file. So pawn on e5 is gone very soon. Rook takes e4 was not played because the players agree to a draw. If you take on e4, you're not winning a pawn. There's queen takes e5, and it will eventually be a 3 versus 3 on one wing. So very comfortable draw for black, and Magnus very happy with this result, which means that the players are going into the Armageddon. And considering this very solid result, it's not a surprise that Magnus repeats the opening. So let's see what's happening here. We have exactly the very same first 11 moves. So here we go again. But the Armageddon is getting more and more exciting, as after castling kingside here, it's up to Firouzja to come up with a new idea. And he played bishop to d5. Very interesting idea. So maintaining the pressure, maybe the knight can sometimes come to c4 and then to e3. Taking on d5 is not an attractive option. Was not played by Magnus. Here the knight is under threat. If the knight goes back to b8, you go rook e1, followed by d4, with a lot of problems on the e-file because of the pawn on e5 being pinned. Also the pressure here against the knight on f6. So that explains why black is not going to take on d5. But now things are getting interesting, as this time here Magnus played the move g5. He wants to release the pin on the knight. So he hits the bishop on h4. And look at this, knight takes g5. This is the move we are looking for. And rather than taking on g5, because in such positions you don't know what to expect. This pin is going to be forever. And there are ideas sometimes to bring the queen to f3 and maybe to g3. Or if you want, you can even consider king h1 with the idea of getting out of that pin to prepare the advance of the f-pawn. And if the f-file will be open, then the knight on f6 can no longer be supported by other pieces. So this is very, very risky, especially in an Armageddon game. Very interesting choice by Firouzja. But Magnus, being under pressure, I know in the Armageddon game it's of course white starting with 10 minutes, black with 7, but white must win. So black doesn't accept the piece sacrifice, but instead captures now with the knight on d5, which is possible as the knight is interrupting on the diagonal towards the queen. But the line continues. It's incredibly sharp. Black is now also intending to take on g5 next, so knight takes e6, attacking the queen. And queen takes h4 played, with ideas, of course, also to continue an attack. Maybe c3 is hanging, so white rather than taking on f8. Played here e takes d5, attacking the knight on c6 as well. Pawn takes e6 played. And, well, very important moment as white first played the move g3. It's important to play so because with the f-file being opened, black is about to take on f2 with the bishop probably. So if you take on c6, bishop takes f2, looks like black is in good shape. So therefore g3 played, first attacking the queen. Queen goes to h3. And now it's pawn takes c6, b takes c6. And we have a very, very unusual imbalanced structure with a very massive pawn center. But at the same time, of course, the black king is also quite open. But we have imbalances, like white has a majority on the king side. And who knows, maybe the knight on d2 can eventually become a better piece than the bishop on a7. But for now, that bishop is also participating in the attack. Anyway, white played queen e2 to protect the pawn and connect the rooks. And black has probably a somewhat easier position to play. At least the next two moves are very logical. Rook f5, with the idea to bring the other rook to the f-file and target the pawn on f2. King h1, getting out of that pin, and after rook a f8, white can play f3. So the pawn is safe, but at the same time you're opening up the diagonal for the bishop. So potentially this king may have some problems being stuck in the corner. Rook g5 played. Magnus, little trickster, playing for the idea of taking on g3 as the pawn on h2 is pinned. And white played the move queen g2. Really wants to solidify his position by trading of queens. After which there are ideas also for white to put the knight on c4. Maybe the knight can come to a5 to hit the pawn on c6. So black is not interested to cooperate. Keeps the queens on the board, hits the pawn on d3. But white comes up with interesting idea to play rook a1, indirectly defending the pawn on d3, as queen takes d3 is met by knight to e4, winning at least the exchange. So rather than taking on d3, Magnus goes for h5 with the idea to go h4. White played knight b3 to my surprise, in fact, because I was thinking the knight could also come to e4, which is more central spot, attacking the rook. But okay, Firouzja has different ideas with knight b3. He can of course consider knight a5, but the other idea is going to be revealed very soon. h4 played. White of course wants to keep the position closed. Hits the queen with g4, queen h7. And well, here queen e2 played. Interesting idea, keeping everything defended, but now black does get a chance to play h3 himself. And this pawn, together with the bishop, it really proves that the king on h1 has long-term problems. If you do get a chance to infiltrate with one of your major pieces, things can go horribly wrong. Now, white played the move d4. That's the idea of knight on b3, supporting this pawn break. Pawn takes d4 was played, not even minding white to capture the pawn on e6. Was not played in the game because of queen f7. And here you do really force the exchange of queens. If the queen goes away, the knight on b3 can be hanging. And for instance, an endgame like this, it should probably not be bad at all. Will be very difficult to win for white. White is in a must-win situation. You can take back on d4, but after the exchange and playing something like c5, black is getting quite some activity with the two rooks and very useful pawn on h3 playing against the king. So instead of taking on e6, white decided to take back with the pawn on d4, keeping the threat in the position. And of course, white is also looking for chances against the black king. So black goes e5. If you take it, there is rook takes e5. The rook is happy, and the bishop also. Black is in very good shape here. So instead of taking, knight a5 was played. Bishop takes d4, and now it's knight takes c6 with the idea to take on d4 very soon. But there is queen to f7. Very good move, putting more pressure on this file. If you do take on d4, then well, you can take the pawn on d4, win it. But after rook e5, there are quite some counter chances with the major pieces. So this is far from clear. And also after queen f7, one of the big ideas is that the pawn on a6 cannot be taken. The idea is of course to create a passed pawn, but it does run into this move, queen a2. And here you see the power of that pawn on h3. Black is threatening checkmate in one, and only with a move like rook g1, giving up the rook, you're able to avoid mate. So that's not attractive, and Firouzja needs to keep playing for a win. Goes for rook c1. That's a good idea. Now Black played the move rook to g6, bringing the rook back along the 6th rank. Maybe it can come to f6 at some point. So here the pawn on a6 was taken. And now it's possible because queen a2 is met by queen c4 with check. That's the idea of having the rook on the c file. So Black cannot go for queen a2, but went here for rook f6, putting pressure against the pawn on f3. If you can take on f3 and eventually get your queen on that square, then the king is in trouble. So White goes back with the queen to e2. Black captured on f3, but guys, this is the moment of the game. After this move, rook takes f3. White decided here to take on f3 and swap everything. We get a rook endgame. We will study it in a second. But after rook takes f3, the big move here for White was missed by Firouzja. It is this fantastic shocker. Knight e7 check. You can, of course, not take on e7 because then the queen is no longer controlling the f3 square. Here, White is just a full exchange up. But where should you go with the king instead? Well, if you play, for instance, king h8, then there is once again knight g6, deflecting the queen. If you take on g6, it's rook takes f3, winning the exchange. So that's also not going to work. If you put a king on g7, well, then there is first knight f5, interfering on the f file with check. White is winning material once again. And also king h7 is the other remaining move, allows queen e4 with check. And wherever you go with the king, there will follow a knight check. King h6 is knight f5 check. And king g7, it's also knight f5. King h8, knight g6. And things are looking good here for White. So this was the missed opportunity for Alireza Firouzja. He decided to take, as I said already, and then we get his rook endgame, and maybe he was thinking that after rook a1, his a-pawn is gonna rush very quickly. But Black also does have a counterplay. In fact, very strong move here is d3. It was not played by Magnus. This is a move to try to play for a win. If you push the a-pawn, then it's d2. And Black is much faster because there is always a rook e3, for instance, with the idea to give a check on e1 and win the game. But Magnus, having in mind that a draw is okay, he goes for rook b3. He goes behind the passed pawn, or at least trying to win the pawn on b4. Now after a5, it's rook takes b4, a6, rook b8, a7. But Black is in time to stop it. And these pawns are very difficult to eliminate. King g1 played. Now White is bringing the king to the center. c5, king f2, king f7, king e2. And here White is about to go king d3. So first c4 is played. White goes rook a5 to cut off the king and disconnect the pawns from each other. d3 check, king d2, king g6 played, king c3, d5. And Magnus is clearly giving a sign that a draw is okay. Because if you take the pawn and via Black captures on a7, everything will be swapped. And very soon you also eliminate the pawn on g4. And for Armageddon game, that's a good result for Black. So here instead, Alireza played the move rook to a2. But he is not making any progress here at all. King g5 was played and the game was over. I think Alireza resigned at this point, as he's going to lose the pawn on g4. He's never going to queen his own pawn, and that means that Magnus managed to win once again an Armageddon game. He has a very impressive track record in Norway chess playing these Armageddon games. Cannot recall he ever lost one. Well, actually in this tournament to Hikaru Nakamura. But still, he is in the lead, having 1.5 points more than Hikaru going into the final round. We know the scoring system. If you win the classical game, you get 3 points. And with a win, you in the Armageddon, you get 1.5 points. So with 1.5 points difference, Magnus is doing a very good business. Very good chances to win Norway chess again. Let's see what is going to happen in that final round. Thanks for watching this video. And if you do like it, well, don't forget to hit the subscribe button or share this video among your friends. Give it a like. PayPal donations are also more than welcome. So thanks for all the support and see you in the final round of Norway chess. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.